A poor little girl found a homeless man in her bed. When she discovered who his son was, her hands trembled as she dialed the number. Sarah's footsteps echoed in the empty hallway as she climbed the stairs to the fourth floor of the old apartment building. Her backpack felt heavy against her shoulders, and her school uniform was wrinkled from the long day. As she reached her floor, she noticed a piece of paper stuck to their apartment door. Her heart sank. She knew exactly what it was. Another eviction notice. The third one this month. She pulled it off quickly, her hands shaking slightly as she folded it and stuffed it into her backpack. Mrs. Jenkins from next door poked her head out, watching Sarah with pitying eyes. Sarah pretended not to notice. "Your grandma still at work, honey?" Mrs. Jenkins asked. "Yes, ma'am. She won't be back until 7. Sarah fumbled with her keys, trying to get the stubborn lock to work. "You need anything?" "I made some cornbread." "No, thank you." Sarah finally got the door open. "I have homework to do." Inside the apartment, Sarah dropped her backpack by the door and looked around the small living room. The paint was peeling off the walls, but everything was clean and organized. She'd made sure of that this morning before leaving for school. The memory hit her suddenly, the way it always did when she was alone. She was 3 years old, sitting on this same floor, watching her mother pack a bag. "It's just for a little while," her mother had said, not meeting her eyes. "Grandma will take good care of you." That was the last time Sarah saw either of her parents. She shook her head, pushing the memory away. There was no time for that now. She had to start dinner before Grandma got home from her cleaning job at the school. Sarah was pulling out a pot for mac and cheese when there was a sharp knock at the door. Through the peephole, she saw Ms. Rodriguez, the social worker, in her neat blue suit and clipboard. Her stomach twisted. She hadn't expected another visit so soon. "Sarah, I know you're in there. I heard you moving around," Ms. Rodriguez called out. Sarah opened the door slowly. "Hi, Ms. Rodriguez." "Hello, Sarah. May I come in? I need to do a quick home inspection." Sarah stepped aside, her mind racing to remember if she'd hidden all the overdue bills in their usual spot behind the kitchen radio. Ms. Rodriguez walked through the apartment, making notes on her clipboard. She opened the nearly empty refrigerator, checked the bathroom where the ceiling was starting to leak, and poked her head into Sarah's small bedroom with its wall of carefully drawn pictures. "Sarah, where's your grandmother?" "At work. She cleans the school until 7. Ms. Rodriguez frowned, writing something else down. "And you're here alone every day after school?" "I'm 11, Sarah said. "I could take care of myself. I do my homework and start dinner." Ms. Rodriguez opened a cabinet, noting the sparse contents. "And how often does your grandmother work late?" Just during the week," Sarah said, trying to sound casual. She didn't mention the weekend shifts Grandma had started taking. The sound of keys in the lock made them both turn. Grandma walked in, still in her gray cleaning uniform, looking exhausted. Her eyes widened when she saw Ms. Rodriguez. "Mrs. Johnson," Ms. Rodriguez said, using Grandma's last name. "I'm glad you're here. We need to discuss Sarah's living situation." Grandma straightened her tired shoulders. "Sarah is well cared for. I'll make sure she has everything she needs." "Mrs. Johnson, this is the 3rd time I've visited this month. The conditions here are concerning. The building's maintenance issues, Sarah being alone after school, the financial instability." She glanced meaningfully at where the eviction notice was peeking out of Sarah's backpack. "I'm working," Grandma said firmly. "I'm doing everything I can. I understand that, but we need to consider what's best for Sarah. The state has programs." "No." Grandma's voice was sharp. "Sarah stays with me. She's all I have left of my daughter." Ms. Rodriguez sighed. "I'll be back next week. Please try to address some of these issues before then." She handed Grandma a card. "Call me if you need assistance finding resources." After she left, Grandma sank into their old armchair, her face in her hands. Sarah quickly went to the kitchen and brought back a glass of water. "Here, Grandma. Are you hungry?" "I was about to make dinner." Grandma looked up, her eyes wet. "Oh, baby, I'm so sorry. You shouldn't have to worry about these things." "I don't mind," Sarah said, but her voice shook slightly. "We take care of each other, right?" Grandma pulled her into a tight hug. Sarah could smell the cleaning products on her uniform, mixed with her grandmother's familiar cocoa butter lotion. "That's right, baby. We take care of each other." Grandma pulled back and wiped her eyes. Now, let me help you with dinner. Later that night, Sarah lay in her small bed, staring at the water stain on her ceiling. She could hear Grandma in the kitchen, counting coins and muttering numbers under her breath. The eviction notice sat heavy in her mind. She rolled over, pulling her thin blanket up to her chin. Tomorrow would be better, she told herself. It had to be. But as she drifted off to sleep, worry gnawed at her stomach, and she wondered how much longer they could go on like this. Outside her window, the city lights flickered, and somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. Another normal night in the Bronx, where dreams often felt as fragile as the peeling paint on their walls. But Sarah was used to it. She had to be, because tomorrow was another day of pretending everything was fine, another day of being strong for Grandma, another day of hoping things would somehow get better. She just didn't know how much longer she could keep pretending. Sarah sat in the hard plastic chair outside Principal Warner's office, her legs swinging nervously. The morning bell hadn't rung yet, but she'd come early with Grandma, who was already starting her cleaning rounds in the cafeteria. Through the office window, she watched other kids arriving with their parents. A father helped his daughter fix her backpack strap. A mother kissed her son goodbye. Sarah looked down at her worn sneakers. The office door opened. "Sarah? Come in, please." Principal Warner sat behind her desk, a folder open in front of her. Her face was serious. "Sarah, I've asked you here because we need to discuss your academic future." She adjusted her glasses. "Your teachers tell me you're one of our brightest students." "Thank you, ma'am. However," Principal Warner continued, "we're concerned about your home situation. We have several advanced programs you qualify for, but they require significant parent or guardian involvement." Sarah's fingers twisted in her lap. "My grandma works really hard." "Yes, Mrs. Johnson is a dedicated employee. But these programs require regular meetings, additional supplies, and transportation to weekend activities." She pulled out a form. "We're having a mandatory parent meeting next Thursday at 6 p.m. to discuss these opportunities." Sarah's stomach dropped. "But that's when Grandma cleans the second-floor classrooms. Sarah, your grandmother needs to be there. This is about your future." In the hallway after the meeting, Sarah watched through a window as Grandma pushed her cleaning cart down the corridor. She had to tell her about the meeting. The cafeteria was filling up with students when Sarah found her grandmother. "Grandma?" Sarah approached quietly. "Principal Warner wants to see you next Thursday. About some special programs." Grandma stopped mopping. "What time?" 6 o'clock. Grandma's face fell. "Baby, that's my busiest time. If I don't finish the second floor by 7, I know." Sarah forced a smile. "It's okay. Maybe another time. Let me talk to Mr. Peterson about switching shifts." Grandma squeezed her shoulder with a wet hand. Sarah spent her morning classes distracted, watching the clock. During lunch, she sat alone, picking at her free meal while other kids chatted with their friends. At the next table, a girl complained about her mom packing the wrong sandwich. Sarah pushed her tray away. After school, she waited by the office while Grandma talked to Mr. Peterson, the head custodian. Through the door, she could hear their conversation. "Please, I just need one evening. Mrs. Johnson, we've been through this. You're already on thin ice after missing work for that social worker visit. It's for Sarah's future, and your job is for Sarah's present. You want to keep this position or not?" Sarah walked away before she could hear more. Her chest felt tight. The afternoon sky turned dark as she sat through her last class. Rain started hitting the windows. Usually, Grandma would wait and walk home with her on rainy days, but today she had to stay late to make up for the time she'd spent talking to Mr. Peterson. "You need a ride, Sarah?" Her teacher, Ms. Thompson, asked as other students rushed out with their umbrellas and rain jackets. "No, thank you. I like walking in the rain." It was a lie, but better than explaining she lived too far for Ms. Thompson to drive. The rain soaked through her thin jacket before she'd gone 2 blocks. Cars splashed dirty water onto the sidewalk. She ducked into a shop doorway, watching families hurry past under shared umbrellas. A boy about her age ran past, yelling, "Dad, wait up!" His father turned back, laughing, and lifted him onto his shoulders. Sarah started walking again, ignoring the cold water dripping down her neck. The apartment building looked grayer than usual in the rain. Inside, she left wet footprints on the stairs. Mrs. Jenkins was in the hallway again. Lord, child, you're soaked. Come in and dry off. Thanks, but I should clean up before Grandma gets home. Sarah unlocked their door. Maybe make things nice for her. The apartment was dark and quiet. Sarah changed out of her wet clothes and hung them over the shower rod. Then she got to work. She wiped down the kitchen counters, swept the floor, and organized the pile of mail they'd been avoiding. She scrubbed the bathroom until the tiles sparkled, even though the ceiling still dripped. In her room, she straightened her bed and reorganized her school books. The wall of drawings needed updating. She took down some old ones and put up her recent art project, a family tree she'd had to complete for class. Hers was simple, just her and Grandma, with 2 empty branches above her name. Thunder crashed outside. Sarah jumped, dropping her pencil case. As she bent to pick up scattered pencils, she noticed water seeping under her window. She grabbed an old towel and stuffed it against the frame. The front door opened. "Sarah? Baby, you home?" "In here, Grandma." Grandma appeared in the doorway, looking more tired than usual. Her uniform was damp from cleaning floors, and her eyes were red. "You cleaned," she said, looking around. "Oh, baby, you didn't have to do that." "I wanted to." Sarah hugged her grandmother's wet sleeve. Maybe we can have a nice dinner? I found some soup cans in the back of the cupboard." Grandma's voice cracked. "I'm sorry about the meeting. I tried." "I know." Sarah grabbed her hand. "Come on, I'll help you change, and then we can eat." Later, as they sat at their small table with steaming bowls of soup, Grandma tried to smile. "Your teachers say such wonderful things about you," she said. "You're so smart, baby. Smarter than your mama ever was." Sarah stirred her soup. Did she do well in school? She was too busy chasing boys and dreams, Grandma sighed. "But you're different. You're going places." Thunder rumbled again. In the bathroom, water dripped steadily from the ceiling. "We should put a bucket under that leak," Sarah said, standing up. "Already did." Grandma's voice was quiet. "But sometimes I wonder if we're just catching drops while the roof caves in." Sarah didn't know what to say to that. Instead, she cleared their bowls and started washing dishes. Through the kitchen window, she could see lights going on in other apartments, families settling in for the night. She wondered what it would be like to not worry about leaks or eviction notices or missed meetings, to not see your grandmother's hands raw from cleaning other people's messes, to not feel like you're always one bad day away from losing everything. But those weren't thoughts she could afford to have. Not when Grandma was trying so hard, not when they needed to be strong for each other. So she dried the dishes, helped Grandma set up her medications for the next day, and pretended not to notice when her grandmother slipped the last few dollars from her purse into Sarah's school lunch account box. That night, the rain kept falling. Sarah lay awake, listening to the steady drip in the bathroom and Grandma's soft snoring from the next room. Tomorrow would be another day of pretending everything was fine. But as she drifted off to sleep, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had to change. She just didn't know what, or how much it would cost them when it did. The weekend arrived gray and cold. Sarah had spent the morning cleaning while Grandma worked her extra shift at the school. The apartment was as spotless as she could make it, given the peeling paint and water stains. She'd even managed to fix the wobbly kitchen chair with some old newspapers stuffed under the short leg. It wasn't perfect, but at least it didn't rock anymore when you sat on it. Almost done, Sarah muttered to herself, gathering her cleaning supplies. Her room was the last space to tackle. The hallway was quiet except for the usual sounds. Mrs. Jenkins' TV next door, someone's baby crying 2 floors down, the rattle of the ancient heating system trying to push warm air through the building. Sarah reached for her bedroom doorknob, then froze. Something wasn't right. A soft sound came from inside. Breathing, maybe? Her heart started pounding. "Hello?" Her voice came out smaller than she intended. No answer, but the breathing sound continued. Sarah's hand shook as she pushed the door open. The hinges creaked. Her scream caught in her throat. There, on her small bed, lay an old man. His clothes were dirty and torn, his white beard matted and unkempt. He was sleeping, one arm dangling off the edge of her bed. Sarah's first instinct was to run, to slam the door and call for help. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the way his face twitched in his sleep, or how his hands trembled even at rest. He looked scared. "Sir," she whispered. The man's eyes fluttered open. They were pale blue and filled with confusion, then fear. He sat up quickly, pressing himself against the wall. I'm sorry, he said, his voice cracking. Please don't call the police. Sarah stood in the doorway, her heart racing. She should be terrified. There was a stranger in her room, on her bed. But instead of fear, she felt something else. Recognition, maybe. Something in his eyes reminded her of herself, of the look she sometimes saw in the mirror. Are you hungry? The words came out before she could stop them. The man stared at her, mouth slightly open. A tear rolled down his weathered cheek. I haven't eaten since yesterday morning, he admitted. Sarah took a small step into the room. Stay here. I'll get you something. In the kitchen, her hands shook as she made a sandwich with the last of their bread and cheese. She filled a glass with water. What was she doing? Grandma would be furious. This was dangerous. Crazy. But she couldn't stop thinking about his eyes. When she returned, the old man hadn't moved. He sat perfectly still, like he was afraid any movement would shatter whatever kindness was being offered. Here, she placed the plate and glass on her small desk, then stepped back to the doorway. He looked at the food, then at her, tears now flowing freely. Why? Sarah shrugged. You looked hungry. He picked up the sandwich with trembling hands. Each bite seemed to pain him, like he was ashamed to be eating it all. I'm Sarah, she said quietly. He swallowed hard. James Thompson. His voice was rough, like he hadn't used it much lately. I used to be somebody. What happened? Mr. Thompson stared at the half-eaten sandwich. I lost my wife. Cancer. After that, nothing made sense anymore. I had money, a good job, a son. His voice broke. But I couldn't face any of it without her. So I just left. Sarah sat on her desk chair, keeping distance between them. You left your son? Jonathan. He's successful now. I see his name sometimes on buildings downtown. Miller Industries. Mr. Thompson's hands shook harder. I was too ashamed to go back. Each year made it harder. How did you get in here? The fire escape. The window was unlocked. He looked down. I've been sleeping in alleys, but it's getting colder. I just wanted somewhere warm for a few hours. I'm so sorry. Sarah thought about her own parents, who had left her with nothing but questions. At least Mr. Thompson seemed sorry about leaving his son. A key turned in the front door. Sarah's heart stopped. Grandma was home early. Sarah? Baby, where are you? Mr. Thompson's eyes went wide with panic. Sarah held up her hand, signaling him to be quiet. In my room, Grandma. Just cleaning. Footsteps approached. Sarah's mind raced. What would Grandma do? Call the police? They couldn't afford attention from authorities, not with the social worker already watching them. The door opened wider. Baby, I brought home some. Grandma stopped mid-sentence, her tired eyes taking in the scene. The cleaning supplies scattered on the floor. The half-eaten sandwich. The old man on Sarah's bed. Please, Mr. Thompson said, his voice breaking. Please don't call anyone. I'll leave right now. He tried to stand but stumbled, weak from hunger and exhaustion. Sarah moved to help him before she could stop herself. Sarah, get away from him. Grandma's voice was sharp with fear. Grandma, wait. He's not dangerous. He's just lost. Lost. Grandma's hand was already reaching for her phone. Like me, Sarah said quietly. Like I was when Mom left. The words hung in the air. Grandma's hand stopped moving. Mr. Thompson sank back onto the bed, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I never meant to scare anyone. I couldn't face another night in the cold. I'm so tired. Grandma looked at the old man, then at Sarah, who still stood protectively near him. Her face softened slightly. Sarah, come here. Sarah walked to her grandmother, but turned to face Mr. Thompson. His son is Jonathan Miller, from Miller Industries. Grandma's eyes widened. The developer? The one building those new shops downtown? Mr. Thompson nodded miserably. I've seen the missing person posters, Grandma said slowly. In the subway station. They've been looking for you for months. I can't go back, Mr. Thompson whispered. Not like this. Not after everything I've done. Sarah felt Grandma's hand tighten on her shoulder. She knew what her grandmother was thinking. They had their own problems, their own struggles. They couldn't afford to get involved in someone else's mess. But then Grandma surprised her. "When's the last time you had a proper meal, Mr. Thompson?" He looked up, confusion crossing his tired face. I don't remember. Sarah, get the soup from last night. Heat it up." Grandma's voice was firm but gentle. "Mr. Thompson, you'll eat something real, and then we'll figure out what to do." Sarah hurried to the kitchen, her heart lighter than it had been in days. Through the doorway, she could hear Grandma talking quietly to Mr. Thompson. "We don't have much, but we know what it's like to be lost." As Sarah stirred the soup on their old stove, she thought about choices. About parents who leave and children left behind. About how sometimes the biggest acts of courage aren't grand gestures, but simple things like sharing what little you have. The soup began to steam, filling the small apartment with its smell. Outside, the city continued its endless noise, sirens, traffic, lives being lived. But in their tiny corner of the Bronx, something had shifted. They had found someone more lost than they were. And maybe, just maybe, that's exactly what they all needed. The kitchen light flickered as Mr. Thompson sat at their wobbly table, his hands wrapped around a bowl of hot soup. Sarah watched him eat slowly, like each spoonful might be his last. Grandma stood by the sink, arms crossed, her face unreadable. "When did your wife pass?" Grandma asked quietly. Mr. Thompson's spoon paused halfway to his mouth. 3 years ago. Martha was her name. His voice cracked. "Brain cancer. It happened so fast." "And your son?" Grandma pressed. "Jonathan Miller?" He tried to help. "After Martha." Mr. Thompson set the spoon down, his hands shaking. "He wanted me to move in with him, see doctors, take medication. But I couldn't bear it. The emptiness it ate me up inside." Sarah moved closer to the table. "So you left?" "One night, I just walked out. Left my phone, wallet, everything." He stared into the soup. "Started walking and didn't stop. Slept in shelters when I could, on the streets when I couldn't." "Your son's been looking for you," Grandma said. "Those posters are everywhere." Mr. Thompson's eyes filled with tears. "I saw them. His number's on them. But every time I thought about calling..." He wiped his face with a trembling hand. The shame was worse than the cold. A siren wailed outside, making them all jump. Sarah watched the red lights flash across their kitchen wall. "You should have stayed," she said suddenly. Both adults turned to look at her. "Even if it was hard, you should have stayed for your son." "Sarah," Grandma warned. "No." Sarah's voice grew stronger. "My mom left me. She just walked away and never came back. At least your son wants you." Mr. Thompson's face crumpled. "You're right. God, you're right. I've been so selfish." "He probably thinks you're dead," Sarah continued. Her hands were shaking now, too. "Do you know what that feels like? To not know?" "Baby," Grandma moved her aside, but Sarah stepped away. "Every time the phone rings, I think maybe it's her. Maybe she remembers she has a daughter." Sarah felt hot tears on her cheeks. "But you? Your son is looking for you. He put up posters. He wants you back." The kitchen fell silent except for the hum of their old refrigerator and Mr. Thompson's quiet sobs. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." Grandma pulled Sarah into a hug. She could feel her grandmother's heart beating fast. "The girl's right," Grandma said over Sarah's head. "A parent leaving, it does something to a child. Something that doesn't heal right." Mr. Thompson pushed his bowl away. "I don't deserve to go back. Not after what I've done." "Maybe it's not about deserving," Sarah said, wiping her eyes. "Maybe it's about fixing what's broken. I wouldn't even know how to start." Mr. Thompson looked down at his dirty clothes. "Look at me. I'm nothing now." "You're his father," Grandma said firmly. "That's something. That's everything." Sarah pulled away from her grandmother and went to her room. She returned with her school laptop, the one they let her take home for assignments. "Let me show you something," she said, opening the computer. She typed quickly, "Jonathan Miller, Miller Industries." The screen filled with news articles and photos. A tall man in expensive suits. Building developments. Charity events. "Look," Sarah pointed. "Miller Industries CEO increases reward for information about missing father." She clicked the article. "He's offering $50,000 to anyone who finds you." Mr. Thompson stared at the screen, at his son's face. "He looks like his mother." He's been searching for 3 years, Sarah read. Every time they think they've found you, it turns out to be another false lead. All that money. Mr. Thompson shook his head. When there are people like you, who can barely... He trailed off, looking around their small kitchen with its peeling wallpaper and dripping faucet. We get by, Grandma said stiffly. Barely, Sarah muttered. Mr. Thompson stood up suddenly, swaying slightly. I should go. I've caused enough trouble. Go where? Grandma asked. Back to the streets, where I belong. No. Sarah slammed the laptop shut. You don't get to run away again. Sarah, Grandma warned again, but her voice was softer this time. You have a chance to fix things, Sarah continued. You can't waste it. Not when some of us never get that chance. Mr. Thompson sank back into his chair. I wouldn't know what to say to him. Start with, I'm sorry, Sarah suggested. That's what I wish my mom would say. Grandma made a small sound, like she'd been struck. Sarah had never said that out loud before. When Martha died, Mr. Thompson said slowly, it felt like the world stopped making sense. Everything I thought I knew just disappeared. I thought leaving would make the pain stop. He looked at Sarah. But all I did was pass that pain to my son. Pain shared is better than pain wondered about, Grandma said quietly. Trust me on that? Sarah opened the laptop again. The article was still there, with Jonathan Miller's office number prominently displayed. We could call, she said. Right now. Mr. Thompson's face went pale. I can't. Then I will. Sarah's finger hovered over the number. Wait. Mr. Thompson reached for her hand. Please. I need time. You've had 3 years, Sarah said, but she closed the laptop again. Grandma walked to their small window. Outside, the city was getting dark. You can't go back out there tonight, she said finally. The couch isn't much, but it's better than the street. I couldn't impose. You already broke into my granddaughter's room. Grandma cut him off. Sleeping on our couch is a step up from that. Mr. Thompson looked down, ashamed. Why are you helping me? Because Sarah's right. Grandma turned back to face him. Some of us never get the chance to fix what's broken. Seems wrong to waste the chance when it comes. Sarah got up and fetched a blanket from the closet. It was old and thin, but clean. She handed it to Mr. Thompson. Tomorrow, she said. We'll call tomorrow. He took the blanket, his hands still shaking. Thank you. Both of you. I don't deserve. No, Sarah interrupted. Don't say that. Just promise you won't disappear again. I promise. He clutched the blanket like a lifeline. No more running. Later that night, Sarah lay in her bed, listening to the unfamiliar sound of someone breathing in their living room. She thought about her mother, wondered if she ever felt the kind of regret that seemed to be eating Mr. Thompson alive. Through her wall, she could hear Grandma on the phone, talking in whispers. Yes, Ms. Rodriguez. No, nothing's changed with our situation. Yes, I understand your concerns. Sarah pulled her pillow over her head. Tomorrow would change everything, one way or another. She just hoped they were doing the right thing. In the living room, Mr. Thompson coughed softly. Sarah wondered if he was really sleeping, or if he was lying awake too, thinking about tomorrow, about facing his son after 3 years of silence. She thought about the reward money, about how it could change their lives. But that's not why they were helping him. They were helping because some breaks needed to be fixed, some wounds needed to heal, and some chances couldn't be wasted. Even if those chances came in the form of a broken man sleeping on their couch, carrying 3 years of regret and a lifetime of chances to make things right. Morning light crept through the living room windows. Mr. Thompson sat on the edge of the couch, his borrowed blanket folded neatly beside him. He hadn't slept much. Neither had Sarah. She watched him from the kitchen doorway as Grandma made coffee. The morning felt strange, heavy with possibilities. We should call the police, Grandma said quietly, pouring coffee into their chipped mugs. That's what normal people would do. Sarah shook her head. He's not dangerous. Baby, we don't know that. Grandma's voice was tight with worry. We're harboring a missing person. If Ms. Rodriguez found out, then we call his son instead, Sarah said. Before anyone else. Mr. Thompson looked up at them. In the morning light, he looked older, more fragile. His white beard was streaked with gray, his clothes wrinkled and worn. I've been thinking, he said, his voice rough from lack of sleep. Maybe I should just go. You've been kind, but I'm putting you at risk. No. Sarah moved into the living room. You promised. No more running. Grandma followed with the coffee cups. Sarah, baby, Mr. Thompson might be right. We have our own problems, like what? Sarah turned to her grandmother. Eviction notices? Past due bills? Maybe his son could help us. Sarah. Grandma's voice was sharp. No, she's right. Mr. Thompson took the coffee with trembling hands. Jonathan, he has money. If he knew you helped me. We're not doing this for money, Grandma said firmly. Sarah pulled out her laptop again. I found more articles about your son. She opened the browser, showing them the headlines. Miller Industries CEO expands search for missing father, Jonathan Miller. I just want to know he's alive. Missing persons case haunts successful developer. Mr. Thompson stared at the screen. At his son's face in the photos. He looks tired. He's worried about you, Sarah said. Look at this one. She clicked on a video interview. Jonathan Miller sat in an office, wearing an expensive suit that couldn't hide the sadness in his eyes. It's been 3 years, he was saying. I just want to know what happened. If he's out there, Dad, if you're watching this, please come home. Whatever made you leave, we can fix it. Mr. Thompson's coffee cup clattered against the table. Turn it off, please. Sarah closed the laptop. The room felt smaller somehow, filled with the weight of those words. He means it, she said softly. He wants you back. You don't understand. Mr. Thompson's hands were shaking harder now. I left him when he needed me most. After Martha, he was grieving too, and I just walked away. So make it right, Sarah insisted. Grandma stood up suddenly. Sarah, get ready for school. But now, please. Sarah hesitated, then grabbed her backpack. As she headed to the bathroom, she heard Grandma speaking quietly to Mr. Thompson. My daughter left Sarah when she was 3. Just walked away like you did. Never called, never wrote. I'm sorry, Mr. Thompson whispered. Every day, I watch Sarah check the mail. Watch her hope. Do you know what that does to a child? Sarah stopped in the hallway, listening. Your son is still looking, Grandma continued. Still hoping. You have a chance to end that pain. But if you run again, I don't know how to face him. Nobody knows how to face their mistakes. You just do it. Sarah came back to the living room, her school uniform on but wrinkled. I can skip school today. Help make the call? Absolutely not, Grandma said. You have a math test? This is more important than. Nothing is more important than your education. Grandma's tone left no room for argument. Mr. Thompson will be here when you get back. Sarah looked at him. You promise? You won't leave? He nodded slowly. I promise. I think I'm done running. The walk to school felt longer than usual. Sarah couldn't focus on her classes. During lunch, she used the library computer to search for more information about Jonathan Miller. His company had offices downtown. Big glass buildings with his name on them. News articles talked about his success, his charitable work, his endless search for his father. One photo caught her eye. Jonathan Miller at a homeless shelter, serving food. The caption read, Miller continues monthly volunteer work, hoping to find clues about missing father. When Sarah got home that afternoon, she could hear voices from inside the apartment. Her heart stopped. Had someone found out? Had they called the police? She opened the door slowly. Mr. Thompson was still there, sitting in their armchair. He'd showered, probably at Grandma's insistence, and was wearing some of their neighbor Mr. Chen's old clothes. His beard was trimmed. He looked more human somehow. Grandma sat across from him, holding papers. Sarah recognized them, the missing person posters. Sarah, Grandma looked up. Mr. Thompson has made a decision. I'm going to call him, Mr. Thompson said quietly. Jonathan. My son. Sarah dropped her backpack. Really? Your grandmother? She helped me see things clearly. He managed a weak smile. She's quite persuasive. When? Sarah moved closer, hardly daring to believe it. Now, Grandma said. Before he changes his mind. Sarah pulled out her laptop with shaking hands. The office number was still on the screen from this morning. Mr. Thompson stared at it. I don't know what to say. Start with hello, Sarah suggested. The rest will come. He reached for the phone, then pulled back. What if he hates me? He's been looking for you for 3 years, Grandma said gently. That's not hate. But after all this time doesn't matter, Sarah said. Not when you're waiting for someone to come back. Mr. Thompson looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up the phone. His fingers shook as he dialed. Sarah held her breath. Grandma gripped the arms of her chair. 1 ring. 2 rings. 3. Miller Industries. How may I direct your call? Mr. Thompson's face went white. He couldn't speak. Sarah leaned forward and whispered, "Ask for Jonathan Miller. Say it's about his father." I need to speak with Jonathan Miller," Mr. Thompson managed. It's about his father." A pause. "1 moment, please." The silence stretched. Sarah could hear her own heart beating. Then a man's voice, familiar from the videos. "This is Jonathan Miller." Mr. Thompson's eyes filled with tears. His hand shook so hard he almost dropped the phone. "Hello?" Jonathan's voice again. "Is someone there?" Mr. Thompson took a deep breath, looked at Sarah, at Grandma. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, "Jonathan, it's Dad." The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. Sarah could hear the static on the phone line, the faint sound of breathing. "Dad?" Jonathan's voice cracked. "Is it really you?" Mr. Thompson's hand shook so badly that Grandma had to help him hold the phone. "Yes, son. It's me. Where are you? Are you okay?" "I've been looking everywhere." The words tumbled out fast, desperate. I'm safe." Mr. Thompson looked around their small apartment. "Some good people found me." "Where? Tell me where." "I'll come right now." Mr. Thompson's eyes met Sarah's. She nodded encouragement. "The Bronx," he said quietly. "I'm in the Bronx." They could hear movement on the other end, papers rustling, keys jingling. "Give me the address." "I'm leaving now." Grandma touched Mr. Thompson's arm. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" He nodded slowly. "I've made him wait long enough." Sarah grabbed a piece of paper, wrote down their address in large letters. Mr. Thompson read it into the phone. "I'll be there in 30 minutes, Jonathan said. Don't go anywhere. Please." "I won't." Mr. Thompson's voice broke. "I'm done running, son." "Dad." Jonathan's voice was smaller now, almost like a child's. "Why did you leave?" The question hung in the air. Sarah held her breath. I couldn't face the world without your mother." Mr. Thompson wiped his eyes. "But I was wrong. So wrong. I hurt you worse than my own pain." A sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "I thought you were dead. I thought I'd lost you both." "I'm sorry." The words came out in a sob. "I'm so sorry, Jonathan. Just stay there. Please. We can talk about everything when I get there." "Okay." Mr. Thompson's voice was barely a whisper now. "Dad?" "Yes. I love you." Mr. Thompson broke down completely. Grandma had to take the phone. "Mr. Miller? This is Mrs. Johnson." "Yes, he's still here. We'll keep him safe until you arrive." She hung up and looked at Mr. Thompson, who sat with his face in his hands, shoulders shaking. "He's coming," Sarah said softly. "He's really coming?" Grandma straightened up. "Then we need to get ready. Sarah, help Mr. Thompson clean up a bit more. I'll make some coffee." The next 20 minutes were a blur of activity. Sarah helped Mr. Thompson wash his face and straighten Mr. Chin's borrowed clothes. Grandma cleared away the breakfast dishes and wiped down their small living room. "What do I say to him?" Mr. Thompson asked, pacing the room. "How do I explain 3 years of nothing?" "Tell him the truth," Sarah said. "About missing his mom. About being scared. The truth." He laughed bitterly. "The truth is I'm a coward who abandoned his son." "No." Sarah stepped in front of him. "The truth is you're here now. You're trying to make it right." A car door slammed outside. Then another. Footsteps on the stairs, fast and heavy. Mr. Thompson froze. I can't do this." "Yes, you can." Sarah grabbed his hand. It was ice cold. A knock at the door. Sharp, urgent. Grandma opened it. Jonathan Miller stood in their doorway, still in his business suit, tie askew like he'd been pulling at it. He was younger than he looked in the photos, but his eyes were older somehow, lined with years of worry. "Dad?" Mr. Thompson turned slowly. "Jonathan." They stared at each other. Neither moved. Then Jonathan took 3 quick steps and pulled his father into a fierce hug. "I thought you were dead," he said into his father's shoulder. "I thought I'd never find you. I'm sorry." Mr. Thompson clung to his son. "I'm so sorry." They stood like that for a long time, both crying openly now. Sarah felt tears on her own cheeks. Grandma wiped her eyes with her apron. Finally, they pulled apart. Jonathan held his father at arm's length, examining him. "You're so thin. Have you been eating? Where have you been staying?" Mr. Thompson looked down. "The streets, mostly. Shelters when I could get in." "Jesus, Dad." Jonathan ran a hand through his hair. "Why didn't you call me?" "I would have. I was ashamed." Mr. Thompson's voice was barely audible. "After what I did, I didn't think I deserved your help." "Deserved?" Jonathan's voice rose. "You're my father. I've had people searching 3 states. I've been to every homeless shelter in the city. I thought maybe you were." He couldn't finish the sentence. Mr. Thompson reached for him again. "I saw the posters," he admitted. "Your number was right there, but I couldn't face what I'd done." "What changed?" Mr. Thompson turned to Sarah and Grandma. "They did. They showed me what I was really running from." Jonathan seemed to notice them for the first time. "You found him?" "He found us," Grandma said. "Broke in through Sarah's window." "I'm sorry, what?" "I was cold," Mr. Thompson said quietly. "The window was unlocked. I just wanted somewhere warm for a few hours." "And you didn't call the police?" Jonathan looked bewildered. "Sarah stopped me," Grandma explained. "She saw something in him worth saving." Jonathan knelt in front of Sarah. "You helped my father? When everyone else would have called the cops." Sarah shrugged, suddenly shy. He looked lost, like he needed someone to care. "How can I ever thank you?" Jonathan's eyes were wet again. Just, Sarah looked at Mr. Thompson. "Just don't let him disappear again." "Never." Jonathan stood up. "Dad, you're coming home with me. Right now." Mr. Thompson nodded. "Yes. If you'll have me." "Have you?" "Dad, I've been waiting 3 years to bring you home." They hugged again, closer this time, like they were afraid to let go. Then Jonathan turned to Grandma. "Mrs. Johnson, please let me repay you somehow. A reward or—" "No," Grandma said firmly. "We didn't do this for money." "But surely we did it because it was right," Sarah said. "Because everyone deserves a second chance." Jonathan looked at her for a long moment. "You're very wise for your age." "She is," Mr. Thompson agreed. "She made me see what I was doing to you. What I'd done." "Then let me help somehow," Jonathan insisted. "Not as a reward. As a thank you." Grandma started to refuse again, but Sarah spoke up. "Actually, there might be something." She told them about their situation. The eviction notices. Grandma's job. The social worker's threats. Jonathan listened, his face growing serious. When she finished, he turned to Grandma. "Mrs. Johnson, I need a manager for my new store. Someone honest, hardworking, who understands the value of second chances. Would you be interested?" Grandma's mouth fell open. I don't have any experience." "You raised this remarkable young lady. That's all the experience I need." Mr. Thompson touched his son's arm. "Jonathan, are you sure?" "Dad, they saved you. Gave you back to me. This is the least I can do." Grandma looked at Sarah, tears in her eyes. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes, Grandma," Sarah whispered. "Please." "Yes," Grandma said finally. "Yes, thank you." As father and son prepared to leave, Mr. Thompson turned back to Sarah. "You showed me the way home," he said softly. "I'll never forget that." Sarah hugged him impulsively. "Just don't get lost again." "I won't." He looked at his son. "I've got too much to stay for now." They watched from their window as Jonathan helped his father into a sleek black car. Before getting in, Mr. Thompson looked up and waved. Sarah waved back, feeling something warm in her chest. Not quite happiness. There was still too much hurt there. But maybe hope. "Think they'll be okay?" she asked Grandma. "I think they've got a chance," Grandma said, pulling her close. "Sometimes that's all anyone needs." The car pulled away, carrying a lost father home. Sarah watched until it disappeared around the corner. Behind her, the phone rang. Grandma answered it. "Yes, Ms. Rodriguez?" "Actually, there have been some changes." "Big changes." Sarah smiled. "Changes indeed. Maybe not the ones she'd been waiting for all these years. But sometimes, she was learning, helping someone else find their way home could heal your own heart a little too." A week had passed since Mr. Thompson left with his son. Sarah sat at her desk at school, trying to focus on her math problems, but her mind kept drifting to the changes in their lives. Grandma hadn't been to work as a cleaner for 3 days now. Instead, she'd been training at Miller Industries' newest store, learning inventory systems and management procedures. She came home tired but smiling, her hands smelling of hand lotion instead of cleaning products. The bell rang, and Sarah gathered her books. As she walked toward the exit, she heard someone call her name. Sarah Johnson? It was the school secretary. There's someone here to see you. Sarah followed her to the office, her heart beating faster. Through the glass door, she saw Jonathan Miller in his business suit, and next to him, Mr. Thompson, clean-shaven, wearing new clothes, looking 10 years younger. "Surprise," Mr. Thompson said, smiling nervously. Sarah ran to hug him. He smelled different now, like soap and aftershave instead of the streets. "We wanted to thank you properly," Jonathan said. "Both you and your grandmother. Can we take you to lunch?" "But school. I've already cleared it with your principal," Jonathan assured her. "Your grandmother's meeting us at the restaurant." Outside, the same black car waited. Sarah had never been in such a nice vehicle before. The leather seats were soft, and the windows were tinted dark. "How are you?" she asked Mr. Thompson as they drove. "Better." He touched his clean-shaven face self-consciously. "The doctors say I'm doing well. I'm taking medication now. For the depression, he's seeing a therapist too," Jonathan added, squeezing his father's shoulder. "We both are." They pulled up to a restaurant Sarah had only seen from outside, the kind with cloth napkins and more than one fork per person. Grandma was waiting outside, wearing her new work clothes, a blue blazer with the Miller Industries logo. "Baby, look at you in this fancy car," Grandma said, hugging her. Inside, they were led to a private room. Sarah watched in amazement as servers brought plate after plate of food. "How's the new job, Mrs. Johnson?" Jonathan asked. "Please call me Grace," Grandma said. "And it's different. Good different." "She's a natural," Jonathan told Sarah. "Already reorganized the entire inventory system." Grandma blushed. "I just did what made sense. That's exactly why I hired you." Jonathan turned to Sarah. "And I hear you're quite the student." Sarah pushed her food around her plate. "I try." "More than try," Mr. Thompson spoke up. "You're wise beyond your years. You saw through my shame when all I could see was darkness. I knew what it was like, to be left behind." Sarah's voice got quiet, to wonder if someone would come back. The table went silent. Jonathan reached for his father's hand. "Sarah," Mr. Thompson said carefully, "I know I can never make up for what your parents did, but I want you to know something." He leaned forward. "Sometimes people leave because they're broken inside. It's not because of anything you did." Sarah felt tears burning in her eyes. No one had ever said that to her before. "He's right," Jonathan added. "I spent years thinking I'd done something wrong, that I hadn't been a good enough son. But it wasn't about me at all. I never thought less of you, son," Mr. Thompson said quickly. I couldn't think clearly at all. I know that now." Jonathan smiled sadly. "That's what therapy is teaching us. How to talk about these things." Grandma wiped her eyes with her napkin. 3 years I've been trying to help Sarah understand. Sometimes it takes a stranger to say the right words." "Not strangers anymore," Jonathan said firmly. "Family. All of you." After lunch, they drove to a building Sarah didn't recognize. The sign out front read Miller Industries Corporate Offices. "I want to show you something," Jonathan said, leading them inside. The lobby was all glass and marble. People in suits nodded respectfully as they passed. They took an elevator to the top floor. Jonathan's office was huge, with windows overlooking the city. But what caught Sarah's attention was the wall behind his desk. It was covered in missing person posters, hundreds of them, all with Mr. Thompson's face. "I never gave up," Jonathan said softly. "Even when everyone told me to move on, to accept that you were gone." Mr. Thompson walked to the wall, touching one of the posters. "I saw these. In the subway, on street corners. I wanted to call so many times. Why didn't you?" Sarah asked. "Fear." Mr. Thompson turned to face them. "Fear of judgment, of rejection. Fear that I'd hurt him too much to ever be forgiven. But I would have forgiven you anything," Jonathan said. "You're my father. I know that now." Mr. Thompson's voice broke. "Thanks to Sarah. She showed me what a child's love really means. How it never really dies, even when tested, Sarah felt Grandma's arm around her shoulders. Which is why, Jonathan continued, we wanted to give you something. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out an envelope. We can't accept any more, Grandma started. It's not money, Jonathan interrupted. Well, not exactly. It's a scholarship fund for Sarah. For any college she wants to attend. Sarah's knees went weak. Grandma gasped. Full tuition, room and board, books, everything, Jonathan continued. In trust so no one can touch it but her. But why? Sarah whispered. Because you gave me back my father, Jonathan said simply. Because you saw hope where others would have seen danger. Because you deserve every chance to become whoever you want to be. Mr. Thompson stepped forward. And because sometimes the best way to heal is to help others heal too. Sarah looked at Grandma, who was crying openly now. Baby, Grandma said through her tears, your future is secure, Jonathan finished. Both of your futures are. The store manager position is permanent, Grace. With full benefits and a retirement plan. Sarah felt dizzy. Just a week ago, they'd been facing eviction. Now, I don't know what to say, she managed. Say you'll work hard, Mr. Thompson suggested. Say you'll remember that second chances are precious things. Say you'll let yourself be happy, Jonathan added. That's all we want. They hugged then, all of them together. An unlikely family formed from broken pieces made whole again. Later, as they drove home, Sarah watched the city pass by outside the car window. The same streets looked different somehow, full of possibility instead of despair. You okay, baby? Grandma asked softly. Sarah nodded, thinking of the scholarship letter in her backpack. Of Grandma's new job. Of Mr. Thompson's transformed face. I just never thought, she started, that helping someone else could help us too. Grandma finished. Yeah. Mr. Thompson touched her hand. You gave me courage to face my son. To face myself. This is just us passing that courage back to you. The car stopped outside their building. It still looked old and tired, but somehow less hopeless. We'll have a new apartment soon, Grandma said. Somewhere closer to the store, but not too far, Jonathan added. Dad wants to visit often, if that's okay. Sarah smiled. More than okay. As they said goodbye, Mr. Thompson hugged her one last time. Thank you, he whispered, for showing me the way home. Sarah watched the car drive away, feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope, pure and simple, stretching out before her like a road leading somewhere better. Upstairs, their apartment was the same. Peeling paint, dripping faucet, thin walls. But it felt different. Temporary now, instead of permanent. A stepping stone instead of a dead end. You did good, baby, Grandma said, hanging up her new blazer. You did real good? Sarah touched the scholarship letter in her pocket. We both did, Grandma. We both did. The morning sun hit different in their new apartment. Sarah stood by the window, watching light stream through clean, uncracked glass. No water stains on these walls. No peeling paint. No dripping faucets. 2 weeks had passed since the lunch with Mr. Thompson and Jonathan. 2 weeks of whirlwind changes that sometimes felt like a dream. Sarah, you ready for school? Grandma called from the kitchen. She was already dressed in her Miller Industries blazer, hair neatly styled, looking years younger. Almost. Sarah touched the window glass. It was warm under her fingers. Their new apartment was in a better part of the Bronx, closer to Grandma's store. 2 bedrooms, a real dining room, and a kitchen with appliances that actually worked. The rent was reasonable. Jonathan had insisted on helping with that too. Ms. Rodriguez is coming today, Grandma reminded her. For the final home inspection. Sarah smiled. Last time the social worker visited, they'd still been in their old apartment. This will be different. The doorbell rang. Right on time, Grandma muttered, straightening her blazer. Ms. Rodriguez stood in the hallway, clipboard in hand, looking confused. She checked the apartment number twice. Mrs. Johnson? She peered past them into the apartment. I must have the wrong. No, you're in the right place, Grandma said, stepping aside. Please come in. Ms. Rodriguez walked through their new home slowly, making notes. Her eyebrows rose higher with each room. This is quite a change, she said finally. How? I got a promotion, Grandma explained. I'm managing the new Miller Industries store on Webster Avenue. Miller Industries? Ms. Rodriguez looked shocked. The development company? Yes. They're very good employers. Ms. Rodriguez looked at Sarah. And school? How are you adjusting to the change? It's good, Sarah said. I can walk to the library now. And I have my own desk for homework. She led Ms. Rodriguez to her room. No more water stains on the ceiling. No more drafty windows. Her drawings hung in proper frames now. Jonathan's idea. And there's more, Grandma said, pulling out the scholarship letter. Sarah's college education is taken care of. Ms. Rodriguez read the letter twice. This is extraordinary. How did all this happen? Sarah thought about Mr. Thompson, about second chances and courage. We helped someone, and they helped us back. After Ms. Rodriguez left, with a final approval stamp on their file, Grandma drove them to school in their used but reliable car. Another change they were getting used to. You're quiet this morning, Grandma said. Just thinking. Sarah watched the familiar streets pass by. Do you ever miss the old apartment? Grandma glanced at her. Do you? Sometimes. Not the bad stuff. Just, it was home for so long. Home is where we make it, baby. Grandma pulled up to the school. And we're making a better one now. Inside the school, Sarah noticed things she hadn't before. Like how she didn't have to feel embarrassed about her clothes anymore. They were new now, not secondhand. How she could join after-school programs because Grandma didn't have to work late anymore. During lunch, she sat with some girls from her class. They were talking about weekend plans, movies they'd seen. Sarah, want to come to the mall with us Saturday? One of them asked. Before, she would have made an excuse. But now, sure, she said. I'd like that. After school, Grandma picked her up and drove to the store. Sarah liked visiting her there, seeing her grandmother in her element. The employees respected her, came to her with questions. No more cleaning floors. Now she was making decisions, solving problems. Sarah. A familiar voice called out. Mr. Thompson stood by the entrance, looking healthy and happy. He visited often now, sometimes with Jonathan, sometimes alone. How was school? He asked, hugging her. Good. How's therapy? Better every day. He touched his clean-shaven face. Jonathan and I are working through things. Talking about Martha. About the depression. That's good. It is. He smiled. Want to see something? He led her to the store's community board. Among the flyers and announcements was a new poster. Second Chances Program. Miller Industries Initiative for Homeless Support. Jonathan started it, Mr. Thompson explained. Shelters, counseling, job training. He says you inspired it. Sarah stared at the poster. Me? You showed us that sometimes people just need a chance. A little kindness. He squeezed her shoulder. We've already helped 3 families get back on their feet. Sarah thought about their old apartment, about the desperation they'd felt, about how one act of kindness had changed everything. Jonathan's coming by later, Mr. Thompson said. We're having dinner together. You and Grace will join us? Before Sarah could answer, the store's front door chimed. A woman walked in, looking lost and afraid, clothes worn and dirty. Sarah recognized that look, the same one Mr. Thompson had worn that day in her room. Grandma approached the woman gently. Can I help you? I saw the poster. The woman's voice shook. About second chances? Mr. Thompson stepped forward. You're in the right place. Let's talk. Sarah watched them lead the woman to Grandma's office. Another life about to change, another chance at something better. Baby, Grandma called out. Can you get us some coffee? Sarah headed to the break room, remembering how she'd once made soup for a stranger in her bedroom. How that simple act of kindness had rippled out, touching more lives than she'd ever imagined. The break room was warm and bright. Employee schedules hung on the wall. Real jobs with real futures. On the bulletin board, someone had pinned up a quote, Kindness changes everything. Sarah made the coffee, adding extra sugar the way Mr. Thompson liked it. Through the break room window, she could see the city stretching out, full of people maybe needing their own second chances. When she brought the coffee to Grandma's office, the woman was crying, but smiling too. The same way Mr. Thompson had that first day. Sarah, Grandma called her in. Come meet Ms. Carter. She's going to be joining our team. The woman wiped her eyes. Your grandmother says you're the one who started all this. The Second Chances program. I just helped someone who needed it, Sarah said. Sometimes that's all it takes, Mr. Thompson said softly. Later that evening, As they sat around a restaurant table with Jonathan and Mr. Thompson, Sarah watched their unlikely family interact. Grandma laughing at Jonathan's jokes. Mr. Thompson sharing stories about his therapy progress. The easy way they all fit together now. Penny for your thoughts? Jonathan asked her. Sarah looked at them all. The successful businessman, the recovering father, the proud grandmother. All connected by one moment of choice, of seeing past fear to possibility. I was just thinking, she said, about how sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest choices. Mr. Thompson reached for her hand. Like opening your home to a stranger? Like seeing a person instead of a problem, Jonathan added. Grandma smiled. Like giving people a chance to prove themselves? Sarah squeezed Mr. Thompson's hand. Like finding your way home? Outside, the city lights twinkled. Somewhere out there, Ms. Carter was probably telling her family about her new job, her new chance. Just like somewhere, another person might be needing their own second chance. But that was tomorrow's story. Tonight was for celebrating how far they'd come and dreaming about how far they could still go. 3 months had passed since that first lunch with Mr. Thompson and Jonathan. Sarah sat at her new desk, pen hovering over blank paper. She'd been trying to write this letter for days. Dear Mom, she wrote, then stopped. Through her bedroom wall, she could hear Grandma humming as she got ready for work. The sound was different now, happier, lighter. No more exhausted sighs, no more counting coins late at night. Sarah looked down at the paper again. I don't know if you'll ever read this. I don't even know where to send it, but I need to write it anyway. The doorbell rang. Sarah set down her pen and went to answer it. Mr. Thompson stood there, holding a paper bag from their favorite bakery. Thought I'd bring breakfast before my therapy session, he said, stepping inside. His face was relaxed, his movements steady. The trembling in his hands was gone. How's the new medication working? Sarah asked, taking the bag. Better. The doctor says my depression levels are stabilizing. He followed her to the kitchen. The nightmares about Martha are less frequent too. Grandma emerged from her room, adjusting her store manager pin. James, you're early. Brought your favorite croissants, Grace. He set out the pastries. Jonathan's joining us for dinner tonight, right? 6 o'clock, Grandma confirmed. He's bringing the contracts for the second store location. Sarah watched them chat easily, remembering how different things had been just months ago. The fear in Mr. Thompson's eyes that first day. The worry lines on Grandma's face. The constant knot of anxiety in her own stomach. Sarah? Mr. Thompson's voice broke into her thoughts. You okay? Yeah, just thinking about the letter. His face softened. To your mother? She nodded. Grandma stopped mid-bite, watching her carefully. Want to talk about it? Mr. Thompson asked. Sarah pulled the half-written letter from her pocket. I don't even know what to say. Say what's in your heart, he suggested. Like you did with me that day. Sarah smoothed the crumpled paper. I'm not angry anymore. Not really. I just want her to know that. Grandma reached for her hand. Baby, you don't owe her anything. Not even a letter. I know, but I need to write it. For me. Mr. Thompson nodded. Sometimes the words we need to say aren't for others. They're for ourselves. After breakfast, Grandma left for the store. Mr. Thompson stayed behind, sitting quietly while Sarah returned to her letter. I used to wait for you, she wrote. Check the mail every day, hoping for a letter, a card, anything. I used to think if I was better, smarter, quieter, maybe you'd come back. She paused, wiping her eyes. But I know now it wasn't about me. Someone helped me understand that. Someone who left his own child, but found the courage to come back. He taught me that sometimes people leave because they're broken inside, not because of anything their children did. Mr. Thompson pretended to read a magazine, giving her privacy while staying close. I'm doing well now. Grandma got a good job. We have a nice apartment. I'm going to college someday. It's all paid for. I have people who care about me, who choose to stay even when things are hard. Sarah's pen moved faster now, words flowing easier. I'm writing this letter not because I'm waiting anymore, but because I'm ready to stop waiting. I'm ready to let go of the dream of you coming back. I'm ready to be happy with the family I have, the family that chose me. The front door opened. Jonathan walked in, still in his business suit. Thought I'd find you here, Dad. He hugged Mr. Thompson. Ready for therapy? Almost. Mr. Thompson looked at Sarah. Just supporting a friend. Sarah folded the letter carefully. I'm done anyway. With the letter? Jonathan asked softly. She nodded. I'm not going to send it. Just needed to write it. That takes courage, Jonathan said. Facing those feelings, Sarah thought about courage. About Mr. Thompson facing his son after 3 years. About Grandma working 2 jobs to keep her. About herself. Opening a door to find a stranger who would change their lives. Want to come to the store? Jonathan offered. Grace is training new employees for the Second Chances program. The store was busy when they arrived. Sarah recognized some of the new trainees, former homeless people like Mr. Thompson had been. They wore clean uniforms now, name tags pinned proudly to their chests. Grandma stood at the front, explaining inventory procedures. She looked different here, confident, authoritative. No traces left of the exhausted cleaning lady she'd been. Sarah, Miss Carter called out. She was shift supervisor now, her own success story from the program. Come see our new display. The community board had grown. More success stories, more second chances. Pictures of people who'd found their way back, like Mr. Thompson. Stories of families reunited, lives rebuilt. Your grandmother's amazing, Miss Carter said. She understands what it's like, you know? To need a chance. Sarah watched Grandma laugh with her trainees. Yes, she does. Later that evening, they all gathered at Sarah and Grandma's apartment for dinner. The table was full, Jonathan, Mr. Thompson, even Ms. Carter and some others from the store. A toast. Jonathan stood, raising his glass. To second chances, to family, Mr. Thompson added, squeezing his son's shoulder. To new beginnings, Grandma said. Sarah touched the letter in her pocket. She put it away in her desk drawer later, not hidden, just stored. A reminder not of what she'd lost, but of what she'd found instead. To choosing to stay, she said quietly. After dinner, Sarah stood on their small balcony. The city spread out below, lights twinkling like stars. Inside, she could hear laughter, dishes clinking, the warm sounds of family. Mr. Thompson joined her outside. You okay? Yeah, she smiled. Just happy. He looked back through the window at Jonathan, who was helping Grandma with dishes. Me too. Do you ever... Sarah hesitated. Do you ever regret coming back? Never. His voice was firm. Coming back was the hardest thing I've ever done. And the best thing, Sarah pulled out the letter one last time. I think I'm ready to let go now. Of your mother? Of waiting for her? Sarah looked at their gathered family inside. I have everything I need right here. Mr. Thompson hugged her. You helped me find my way home. Seems only fair I help you find yours too. Inside, Jonathan was telling a story, making everyone laugh. Grandma sat in her favorite chair, looking content. Ms. Carter and the other trainees listened, belonging here as much as anyone. This was home now. Not just the apartment with its clean windows and working appliances, but these people, this unlikely family built from broken pieces and second chances. Sarah took one last look at the letter, then tucked it away for good. She didn't need to send it. Didn't need to wait anymore. Ready to go back in? Mr. Thompson asked. Sarah nodded, following him inside to their waiting family. To the future they were all building together, one second chance at a time. Because sometimes, she'd learned, the family you find is better than the one you lose. Sometimes the hardest choices lead to the best changes. And sometimes, home isn't a place you return to, but a place you build with people who choose to stay. Behind her, the city kept moving, full of others maybe waiting for their own second chances. But that was okay. They'd find their way too, just like she had. For now, she had everything she needed right here. A grandmother who never left. A recovered father figure who showed her the way back from loss. A successful man who gave second chances freely. And a growing family of others who understood what it meant to be lost and found again. This was her story now. Not a story of abandonment, but of discovery. Not of loss, but of gain. Not of waiting, but of living. And it was just beginning,